Welcome to Demystifying Iran. For decades, while the West scrutinized Iran's peaceful nuclear energy program, its support for the Palestinian people, and its support for countries under Western imperial siege in Latin America, West Asia, and Africa, another story of Iranian national resilience was being written. A story of a nation under siege, forging its own sword and shield, an independent deterrence. Missiles and drones designed and built by Iranian hands for Iranian defense and retaliation. Last June, this deterrent was tested in a brutal, sinister war of aggression. Over 1,100 Iranian lives were lost in the unprovoked war, which occurred while Iran was negotiating with the deceitful Trump regime. The world saw the cost of resistance, but it also saw the sword and shield beat back the ethno-supremacist regime and its Western backers. From Washington and Tel Aviv, the narrative now shifts.
We informed, and what we reported was that we did not have, as in coincidence with some of the sources you mentioned there, that we did not have any proof of a systematic effort to move into a nuclear weapon.
Having failed to produce any evidence of a weapons program in Iran's peaceful nuclear activities, as even confirmed by U.S. intelligence and the Western-dominated IAEA, they now openly target Iran's legitimate conventional defense capabilities. The goal is clear: to leave the Islamic Republic defenseless in a region bristling with U.S.-led hostile forces. The demand is not subtle. Iran must disarm while its Western and Zionist adversaries continue to arm. Unsurprisingly, Iran's response is principled, resolute, and absolute. The missile program is non-negotiable. It is the indispensable guarantor of national security born from the bitter experience of war and decades of threats and sanctions meant to cripple the nation's right to sovereignty and self-defense.
During the Iran-Iraq War, Saddam Hussein, at the onset of the war, was using his advantage, technological advantage, was getting a lot of support internationally, including from the West, to attack Iranian cities. The war on cities devastated Iranian civilians. He was using the war on civilians to pressure Iranian leadership into giving up, and that's when Moghadam started to develop the first missiles.
This is not aggressive. This is the logical, legal, and necessary response to encirclement. While Iran's adversaries fearmonger about this rebuilding of stockpiles of missiles, Iranians see it as maintaining the balance of deterrence, a sovereign nation reinforcing the wall that keeps Western aggression at bay. But to understand this unbreakable resolve, to understand why no Iranian official will bargain away this shield, we must look at the roots of the missile program. Decades ago, there was a time when Iran's strategic fate was not in its own hands, but was instead a commodity relinquished and outsourced by the corrupt Pahlavi monarchy. Before Iran's indigenous defense industry was created, its security was not a product of its own will, but depended on imperial powers. Before the Islamic Revolution, Iran was often described by Western officials, particularly Americans, as the policeman of the Persian Gulf, a subordinate pillar of Western regional strategy. The reality was one of profound dependency and enormous military expenditure by Iran to preserve Western interests. Billions were spent on advanced American weapons, jets, tanks, fleets, with U.S. military advisors installed to prevent Iranian engineers from comprehending the purchased technology. During the Shah's reign, the United States provided an open-ended agreement to sell enormous quantities of any non-nuclear weaponry to Iran, with multi-billion-dollar contracts executed in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Regarding surface-to-surface missiles, this access was quickly revoked. The U.S. first denied the sale of the Lance missile system with a 120-kilometer range. A refusal later extended to include rockets with a range of 60 kilometers. Confronted with this technological prohibition, the Shah turned to the Israeli regime. A joint venture named Project Flower was launched in 1977 with the technical goal of increasing the range of the Israeli Gabriel anti-ship missiles to between 150 and 200 kilometers. The project concluded in 1978, before the revolution, without achieving its objectives. Despite Iranian funding, Israeli experts departed, taking all technical documentation with them. In 1979, with the rise of the Islamic Republic, all ties with the Zionist regime were severed completely, and the one-sided Project Flower was officially terminated. Iran received only obsolete technology through the ridiculously expensive partnership with the Zionist regime, while Israel covertly utilized Iran's $1 billion investment to finance the development of its own next-generation weapon systems. Consequently, after the revolution and Saddam's Western-backed aggression in 1980, Iran lacked operational missile systems and the foundational knowledge to produce them. The sequence, an initial technological denial by the U.S., followed by a financially and technically exploitative partnership with the Israeli regime, functioned as a strategic catalyst. It demonstrated the unreliability and deceptiveness of foreign suppliers and created a direct security imperative. The logical and necessary outcome was the pursuit of fully independent domestic missile and drone programs, which became the cornerstones of Iran's post-revolution defense doctrine. Saddam's Western-backed 8-year war of aggression was a turning point. While both Western and Eastern blocs armed the aggressor to the teeth, with the West even providing Saddam with a massive chemical weapons capability, they placed an embargo on Iran's own defense. Hence, a critical realization hardened. The era of purchasing and reliance was over. The era of building and self-sufficiency had to begin. Days after the invasion of Iran began, Saddam's war against cities was declared. On October 8, 1980, 3 Frog 7 missiles fired from far behind the front lines struck the very heart of Dezful, crashing onto homes and marketplaces. For 3 long years, Iran's border cities lived under a rain of fire, with long-range artillery pounding them endlessly. The world watched and sent more weapons to the aggressor. And what did Iran have? Project Flower was a useless scrap of paper. This was the crushing reality born from the old regime's dependency, especially on the Israeli regime. There were no missiles to fire back. The lesson of Project Flower was seared into Iran's national consciousness. True security cannot be imported. It cannot be contingent on another entity's politics or permissions. The military fought back against military targets with everything they had, but their reach was limited. Iran needed to send a message that could travel as far as the threat did. For almost 2 years, every time Saddam would strike cities, Iran would fire flares as a warning over Iraqi border cities. In early 1982, when the attacks wouldn't stop, the flares were used to alert Iraqi civilians to evacuate areas near military centers. Iran would strike the source of the aggression, not civilians, a declaration of retaliation, but with principle. After years of strikes on civilian targets in Tehran and other major Iranian cities, in March 1985, Iran retaliated and struck the Rafidain Bank in Baghdad after acquiring a limited number of Soviet-made Scud B missiles from Libya. But these were not enough. The bombardment and missile strikes continued, supported by hundreds of billions of dollars from oil-rich Arab regimes and weapons from Eastern and Western blocs. Iran's Supreme Defense Council made a major decision. IRGC commanders had proposed that the issue of missile bombardments must be responded to at the same level at which the Ba'athist regime was operating. But there was no system, no infrastructure, not even a single suitable rocket. A decision was made. The mission was to build a missile unit from absolute zero. They chose the man for the almost impossible task, a young artillery commander named Hassan Tehrani Muqaddam. His order was to acquire the knowledge that no one would sell Iran. In late 1984, he and 12 others embarked on a journey to Syria. There were not enough of them, so they split into shifts, morning and night, each man mastering multiple roles: launch command, assembly, fueling, and guidance. They were transforming themselves from artillery officers into the founding fathers of a new force. While Tehrani Muqaddam sought the knowledge abroad, another young visionary, Amir Ali Hajizadeh, established the Hadid Missile Brigade. Although the brigade had neither missiles nor launchers, he swiftly moved to create an infrastructure. This was the birth of Iran's missile program, the IRGC's aerospace force emerging from the necessities of resistance. Soon, the first physical missiles would arrive from Libya to begin the process of reverse engineering. The Oghab and the Shaheen missiles were Iran's modifications and first steps onto the path of indigenous design. This process gave birth to more than missiles. It forged an unshakable understanding. Facing an enemy, Iran found a strategic equalizer. The missile became the great leveler, but they had to be made at home. The war ended in 1988, but the mission had only just begun. The U.S. invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, followed by threats such as all options are on the table from Presidents Bush and then Obama, made this an even greater necessity. The capability to build missiles had been proven. Now the task was to build an industry with indigenous research and development, a fundamental transition from the improvisation of garage workshops to the enduring power of a national military ecosystem. This was about much more than a single series of weapons. It was about weaving self-reliance into the very fabric of the nation. The foundation of this ecosystem was laid not first on factory floors, but in top Iranian universities and academic programs that became incubators. Research and development shifted from reactive copying to forward-looking and ultimately cutting-edge innovation, training a new generation of scientists across many fields. Institutionally, the scattered efforts were unified and boosted. Entities like the Aerospace Industries Organization and major IRGC-owned defense conglomerates were created. These were not just factories. They were integrated engines of innovation, handling everything from raw material science to final assembly, from research to mass production. The products of this ecosystem then began to evolve. The first family, the Shahab missile series, mastered liquid fuel propulsion and extended its reach. But liquid fuel had its limits. It required time-consuming preparation. The pursuit of a quicker, more survivable response led to the next breakthrough: solid fuel technology. This was the game changer. Missiles like the Fateh and Zelzal represented this leap. They were stable, reliable, and crucially, swift to launch. They could be moved, hidden, and fired before an adversary could react. This technology reached its apex with the Sijil missile, a sophisticated, long-range solid propellant system that announced Iran's mastery of one of the most demanding disciplines in rocketry. In parallel, cruise missiles like the Sumar, Ya Ali, and Hoveze were also developed, flying low and fast to evade radar. Perhaps just as transformative were unmanned aerial systems, drones. Together, these systems created a layered, multifaceted shield and sword, each component designed to complicate an enemy's calculus. The doctrine was prioritized because, with the Air Force hampered by decades of sanctions, Iran required an asymmetrical answer: missile and drone deterrence. It became a non-negotiable cornerstone of national security, a guarantee that any aggression would meet a cost so severe, initiating it would be unthinkable. This doctrine demanded greater reach. From imported Scud missiles with a 300-kilometer reach in the 1980s, progress was systematic. Through reverse engineering and incremental upgrades, Iran developed increasingly capable medium and long-range ballistic missiles, an undeniable strategic achievement. This deterrence had evolved into a multi-layered capability, keeping the Islamic Republic's most determined enemies at bay for years. Also, by sharing expertise and technology with allied resistance forces across the region, Iran has effectively extended their collective defensive and offensive perimeter. These partners have become nodes in a network of deterrence, ensuring that adversaries face multiple simultaneous threats on various fronts. It is a strategy that multiplies the cost of aggression, something the Trump regime will soon discover if it carries out any act of aggression. The missile program has transformed from a project of survival into the central pillar of a security doctrine, one that makes the evil empire think twice. It is no longer just about defending borders. It is about defining the rules of engagement for the entire region and beyond, declaring that the era of unilateral military action against Iran and its allies is over. For a long time, military power was judged by the size of weapons stockpiles. But a nation forged under decades of sanctions and threats learned a different lesson. Real power comes from innovation, not just inventory. This lesson was decisively proven during the 12-day war of aggression, where Iran confronted an enemy protected by what was often described as near invulnerability. For years, a powerful narrative existed, the myth of the Iron Dome. Global media portrayed it as a perfect, unbreakable wall of defense, the ultimate symbol of high-tech advantage, funded and supplied by the United States. But a strategic shift had occurred. Missiles like the Ahmad and Khorramshahr represented this evolution as instruments of indigenous technology capable of striking very hard and with precision. When the US-Israeli attack came, the enemy was protected not only by the American-enabled Iron Dome and Arrow 3 systems, US SM-3 and SM-6 missiles, US Patriot PAC-2 and PAC-3 systems, but by the latest and most expensive American system, THAAD. The defense consisted of multiple layers of the world's most costly shields. The myth of invincibility shattered in just 12 days. The defense systems proved unable to counter the Islamic Republic's onslaught, whether powerful, highly advanced ballistic missiles or even older generation missiles that swarmed and overwhelmed US and Israeli defenses. A significant amount of the entire US global stockpile of THAAD interceptors was fired in less than 2 weeks, with each interceptor costing approximately $12 million. The financial toll of the THAAD effort was astronomical. Yet the most critical fact remains. Every weapon Iran used in its retaliation was domestically produced. Despite decades of sanctions designed to cripple its industries, including the military sector, Iran achieved strategic high-tech self-sufficiency. While its enemy relied on expensive foreign supply chains, Iran built this capability independently and at a fraction of the cost. This exposed a fundamental problem. American production facilities can manufacture limited numbers of these complex THAAD interceptors in an entire year. The shield is not only prohibitively expensive, it is logistically unsustainable. In contrast, Iran's domestic production capacity is resilient, decentralized, and capable of regeneration. The economic difference is stark. The adversary must spend enormous amounts of money to intercept what Iran can produce for a fraction of that cost. The 12-day war revealed a new reality. A domestically built defense industry can challenge and defeat even the most heralded shields. The notion of Western invincibility was a myth. Resilience, ingenuity, and strategic independence are now the facts on the ground. The trajectory is clear. True security is forged through indigenous capability, strategic intellect, and unwavering resolve, something the enemies of Iran and the axis of resistance may soon learn the hard way. Western media and elites, liberal and conservative, can lie all they want about casualty figures in the CIA and Mossad-led riots. Even though their regimes are responsible for every death, they do this to supposedly justify war against the Iranian people. They will ultimately fail. Iran's military capabilities ensure that any aggression will lead to the collapse of Western economies. See you next week.